Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And folks, welcome back into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. If this is your first time listening to our team autopsy reports from the 2024 season, welcome aboard. If you're back with us once again, thank you as well. We got a lot to break down, and we got the 2024 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets on the autopsy table right now. Head coach Brent Key, you say you want to run the ball? Baby, let's talk about it. In your 3 years as the head coach there in beautiful downtown Atlanta, Georgia, your record 18-16. Got off to a rocky start to begin his first season, going 4-4. But in the last 2 years, 7-6 in both of those campaigns. So is the arrow pointing up for Brent Key, or is he just starting to level off, and this is going to be about the plateau of a program that I say should be a lot better than what they have been for most of their existence in college football? This team is in a fertile recruiting hotbed of Atlanta, Georgia. They should be able to have access to much better talent, regardless of the academic standards there at Georgia Tech. Other programs have had high academic requirements to get in admission there. They can absolutely start to compete at that level. Let's start right there with the betting total, as we always like to do in these podcasts. The season win total for this team back in June was 5.5. If you took that over, you were a happy man or woman going into the betting window, cashing that ticket as this team hit that 7-win plateau there in the regular season. Now, let's talk about some other components. As far as our composite win total, there are 3 data points that go into us making up this number. We had this team closer to where they finished at the regular season. We had them as a 6.7, so basically a 7-win team if you round that up. So they met our expectations. They met the betting market expectations. That's something we're going to keep an eye on going forward here. Now, let's talk about your strength of record and your strength of schedule. Your strength of schedule, as far as your non-conference, you can control that. The in-conference, now with the expansion of these conferences, you really can't control that nearly as much. It's really going to come down to a luck of the draw. Did you have a difficult in-conference schedule, or did you kind of dodge some of the heavyweights in your conference? Their strength of schedule, 0.493. That was the 31st toughest schedule out of 134 teams last year. Now, their SOR, strength of record, basically kind of like your opponent's winning percentage, 0.606, 19th best in the nation. That means their opponents were putting up wins throughout their regular season. So that's going to be something we bear in mind here as we get into their numbers. So as we always like to do, we're going to leave you with a key takeaway from just an overall standpoint. The Yellow Jackets met our expectations in every single aspect, going over their season win total, even outperforming our in-season composite win total there as well. So largely due to a very effective offense and solid play in close games. I'm going to be talking about that here in just a moment. And if you're watching on YouTube or catching the live stream on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, thank you for watching. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you for joining. We're going to go through the numbers that everyone that's watching on YouTube is able to see from a visual standpoint. Let's talk about their opponents here. Just from a win-loss record standpoint, we'll get into the breakdown here after that. First 2 weeks, absolute cupcakes in what turned out to be a very bad Florida State team and Georgia State team. Both of those teams winning less than 3 games last year. Then we step up in weight class for sure after that. Syracuse finished 9-3. Louisville 8-4. Duke 9-3. UNC 6-6. Notre Dame 11-1. Virginia Tech 6-6. Miami 10-2. NC State 6-6, Georgia 10-2. We talked about some of those teams that they faced with some really good records there. 5 teams with at least 9 wins on their schedule at Louisville with 8. That's a really good schedule that they went up against. Now, let's talk about their opponents' defensive power rankings. And we're going to use that baseline number of 68. 68 Power 4 teams, including Notre Dame. How many of their opponents were inside of that top 68? Kind of judging the strength of their opponents' defenses and what their offense went up against. So Florida State was 51st. Despite that horrible record, their defense was solid. If you haven't had a chance, go back and listen to that one. We give a very deep breakdown of Florida State. Syracuse 67th, Louisville 40th, Duke 45th, Notre Dame 9th, Virginia Tech 28th, Miami 47th, and rounding out, Georgia had the 5th best power rank defense in our metrics last year. 8 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. You average those out, they faced about a top 50 defense week in and week out last year. So went up against their offense went up against some really solid defenses. Now, if I had to bullet point their offense before getting into the metrics here, I would say their offense was balanced and effective, averaging 29 points per game. Average NCAA team last year averaged about 28. As far as now, when we adjust for opponents, because we're going to give you both those raw accounting stat numbers and we're going to give you our adjusted numbers. So I mentioned 29 points per game, but when we adjust that for opponent, goes down by a field goal to 26 points per game. Their passing offense. Average team last year averaged about 227 yards passing per game. The Yellow Jackets were at 240 yards passing per game. And when we adjust for opponent, goes down just a tick to 234 yards passing per game. Average NCAA team ran the ball for about 160 yards last year. Yellow Jackets were at 187 per game. When we adjust for opponent, just down a tick to 181. Total offense, average team about 387 yards per game. Yellow Jackets were at 427. When we adjust for opponent, just goes down a little bit to 415 yards per game. This team did a great job of not allowing sacks last year. We want to talk about Brent Key having a very major impact. Only 7 sacks last year. To put that in context, the average team allowed about 23.5 sacks per game last year. So great job there by that former offensive line coach, Darren Brent Key. This team also did a great job of taking care of the ball. Only 8 turnovers last year. When we break down some of their other advanced numbers here. Drives ending with either a touchdown or field goal. Average team last year was about 40%. Yellow Jackets were at 43.5%, so outpacing that number. As far as their drives ending with a touchdown, average team last year about 28%. Georgia Tech was at 34.4% of their drives ending with a touchdown. And on third downs, average team last year, 39%. Yellow Jackets were at 41%. So fantastic job all the way around there with those numbers. Now, when we talk about our 3 E's, how effective, how explosive, and how efficient your offense was last year. We'll do the same for the defense here, but as far as being effective, the Yellow Jackets were 33rd. As far as being explosive on offense, they were 50th. As far as being efficient, they were 49th. The Yellow Jackets ended the regular season as our 45th ranked offense in 2024. Let's talk about the defense here. And using that same baseline of 68, how many of their opponents' offenses were ranked inside of that top 68? So were you going up against some really quality offenses? Syracuse was 20th. Louisville was 18th. Duke was 59th. North Carolina was 40th. Notre Dame was the 4th power-ranked offense for us last year. Virginia Tech was 34th. Miami, the number 1 power-ranked offense for us last year. North Carolina State was 43rd, and the Georgia Bulldogs were 12th. 9 of their opponents were inside of the top 68. So you want to talk about just from an overall standpoint, week in and week out, they were facing a top 40 offense week in and week out. So this Georgia Tech defense was absolutely tested last year, week in and week out, looking at that number. If I had to bullet point their defense, I would say this defense was solid, but did show some vulnerabilities throughout the season. Probably why that win-loss record wasn't a little bit better, especially when you think about a team that did not have a lot of turnovers last year. All right, let's get into the defensive numbers. This defense, the accounting numbers say that this defense gave up about 25 points per game. When we adjust for opponents, take that down by a touchdown. We had them at 17 points per game, almost an 8-point per game improvement there. As far as their passing yards allowed, accounting numbers say 226 yards per game passing. When we adjust for opponent, it's actually 196, almost a 30-yard improvement there by the pass defense. And their rush defense, folks, the rush defense was good. 120 yards per game allowed. When we adjust for opponent, that goes up about almost 20 yards, up to about 140, still below the NCAA average of 152 last year. Total offense allowed 346 yards per game. We adjust that down to 336 based on opponents. About, let's call it about 25 plus yards better than the NCAA average. This team did not do a great job of getting after the opponent's quarterback, though. Only 13 sacks last year. Struggled to rush the passer. As far as turnovers, did not force a lot of turnovers, only 11 forced turnovers last year. And as far as their opponents' conversion rate on fourth down, opponents went for it 27 times, converted 16 of them. That's almost 59% conversion rate on fourth down. NCAA average is about 53%. So struggled there in some key spots on the defensive side of the ball. Now let's talk about their defensive 3 E's. How effective, explosive, and efficient this defense was. As far as being an effective defense, they were 46th. As far as giving up explosive plays, 61st. And as far as being efficient, this defense was the 40th most efficient defense in college football for us last year. Overall defensive ranking, 49th in college football. So solid, just not great. As I mentioned, gave up some very big plays throughout the year last year, cost them a couple of games. The special teams, mixed results is what I would say about their special teams. The field goal kicking, atrocious. 12 out of 18. It's about 67%. NCAA average, about 76% there. Did make all their extra points, so you like that. We had them with a total kicking percentage of 885. Folks, that was 93rd in the nation last year. Now, the punting game was a bright spot. Averaged about 43 yards per punt there, about 44th in the nation in that data point. Turnover differential looks good, but like I said, they did a great job of taking care of the ball. Just needed to force a little bit more turnovers. Now, this team was very well disciplined, only committing about 5 penalties per game for about 38 yards. NCAA average about 6 penalties per game for about 53 yards. So great job of keeping that team very disciplined as far as committing unforced errors, as we like to call it. Now the coaching situation. In 1-score games last year, this team was 4-2, with their losses coming to, looks like, Syracuse and Georgia. Looks like those wins were against North Carolina State, getting that upset win over Miami. Definitely North Carolina, and it looks like, where was the other win? Oh, the season opener there in Dublin against Florida State as a double-digit underdog, beating Florida State 24-21. So great job in 1-score situations against quality opponents. This team was 1-5. So that's the mixed bag from the coaching standpoint. As far as going for it on fourth down, and you would expect this from a former offensive line coach here. This team went for it on 26 attempts, converted 14 of them, about 53% there, which is right on the average there. So Brent Key was the 25th most aggressive head coach out of 144 qualifying teams last year. Now, let's talk about how did this team look in the games that they won from an offensive standpoint. We'll flip it over and do the same for the defense here. And I really want to dive into their numbers a little bit more so than what I would typically do, because I want to see if I can spot some more trends that we can possibly look at for the 2025 season. So I'm going to give a little bit more in-depth number breakdown here for Georgia Tech. In their 7 wins, this team averaged about 34 points per game. Their pass attempts, 26 passing attempts in their wins. I want you to kind of bullet point that for me. 211 passing yards per game. 8 yards per passing attempt, 11.6 yards per completion. Good, not great. Good, not great. About 41 rushing attempts per game. Remember, I said former offensive line coach wants to run the ball. when his team was successful running the ball was a key contributor to those wins. 230 yards rushing per game when they won, 5.7 yards per rushing attempt. Gotta like that. 6.6 yards per play, averaged about 441 yards per game in total offense. Their run pass ratio, when they were winning, this team was about 61% run, 39% pass. This team was converting on third downs at a 46.6% clip and was converting on fourth downs at an 83% clip. Only had 6 fourth down attempts in those wins. Need you to bullet point that. So 7 wins, they only attempted 6 fourth down attempts, committed 2 turnovers. Let's talk about the games that they lost. In those 5 losses, offense was averaging about, let's call it 21.5 points per game. Passing attempts go way up, 39 passing attempts per game. Passing yards go up, 282 yards per game passing, 7.2 yards per passing attempt, 12.1 yards per completion. They were running the ball less, 34 rushing attempts per game in their losses, 136 yards per game, 3.7 yards per rushing attempt. Total offense dips down to 408, 5.6 yards per play. This team run pass ratio, 53% pass. Let's call it 47% run. Third down conversion, 35%. Fourth down conversion, 45%. They attempted 20 fourth downs in their losses, committed 6 turnovers. So the difference when they won compared to when they lost, they were averaging almost 13 more points per game. They were averaging almost 13 fewer passing attempts per game. They were averaging almost 7 more rushing attempts per game for 100, and let's call it 104 yards per game. Almost 2 yards per rushing attempt better in those wins. And I talked about the difference between their run-pass ratio. Also, I want you to think about this. The more aggressive they were, that led to losses. That's something to keep in mind there for this team going forward. All right, let's flip it over to the defense here. In those 7 wins, this defense was allowing 19 points per game, 202 yards passing on 31 passing attempts, 6.6 yards per passing attempt allowed, 10.9 yards per completion. Their opponents did not find a lot of success running the ball in those wins. 28 rushing attempts, 125 yards per game rushing allowed, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. Total offense in those wins allowed 327 yards of total offense allowed, 5.6 yards per play. Their opponents were converting about 32% on third downs. Opponents were converting about 47% on fourth downs, 17 fourth down attempts by their opponents, and forced 9 turnovers in those wins. In those 5 losses, allowing almost 32 points per game. Pass attempts by their opponents tick up just a little bit to 33 pass attempts per game, 260 yards per game passing, 7.8 yards per attempt, 11.7 yards per completion. Now, here's something that I'm noticing. Even in their losses, their opponents running the ball 31 times per game, 113 yards. So the pass defense was probably a liability there. 5.8 yards per play, 373 yards of total offense per game in those losses. Their opponents on third down, 37% on third down. So still a great job there. Fourth down conversions, though, by their opponents, 80%. Attempted 10 fourth down attempts on those 5 losses, only forced 2 turnovers. So the difference in when they lost, giving up about, call it 12.5 more points per game, giving up about 50, let's call it 58 more yards passing. That's not substantial. Actually giving up 12 yards per game less. So looks like it was more offensive related than defense related. So what went wrong for the Yellow Jackets in 2024? Struggled against strong opponents, as I mentioned. Inconsistent explosiveness on offense. If they weren't getting big chunks from the run game, this team was not doing well. And then a low sack rate on defense. So let's get to the Yellow Jackets. Let's get some final thoughts in here before we get to their final grade. Haynes King, the starting quarterback, completed an amazing 73% of his passes. However, and this is a big however, you're talking about a quarterback that averaged only 192 yards per game passing, 7.9 yards per attempt, could not push the ball down the field whatsoever. We like the 2 INTs, the 14 touchdowns, but if you're talking about stepping up in weight class, you can't have a quarterback that's only averaging a little over 1 passing touchdown per game. And you're going to say, wait a minute, what was he in the ground game? I'm glad you asked. 125 rushing attempts on the season, 587 yards. Yes, did have 11 rushing touchdowns, 4.7 yards per rushing attempt, 53 yards per game on the ground. You're still talking about a quarterback that averaged less than 250 yards per game in total offense. You're going to need to be much more explosive than that. Jamal Haynes, their running back, did not have 1,000 yards rushing, did not have double digits in touchdowns, only 73 yards per game rushing. Malik Rutherford, their leading wide receiver, 62 receptions, 702 yards, only 3 receiving touchdowns. Haynes King, you got to give me more production there as a passer than what we saw last year. Let's get to the final verdict and the final grade for the Yellow Jackets. Ladies and gentlemen, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets will receive a final grade of a solid B. This team was balanced on offense, effective rushing attack, and strong situational play. Their weakness, they struggled against strong opponents. Their pass rush and gave up way too many explosive plays on defense. Final verdict. The Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets had a solid season, met expectations, and finished with a reasonable record. However, their inability to consistently generate explosive plays and a lack of defensive pressure limit their ceiling last year. Let's get to the 3 things that they have to get better at in 2025 if they want to elevate their program and really go to the next level. 1, they got to be more explosive on offense, 6 yards per play, which is barely above the NCAA average last year, 5.8. Got to find big chunks. You find big plays in the passing game. Got to get more explosive there from the wide receiver and quarterback being able to push the ball down the field. Key number 2, got to enhance the third down and red zone efficiency in those big pressure games there for the Yellow Jackets. Converting key opportunities will lead to more scoring opportunities, and we saw the drop off from this team when they lost, could barely get over 21 points per game. Third, they got to find a way to create more turnovers. Winning the turnover battle is crucial in any level of football, but especially college football. More times you can give your offense the ball, fewer opportunities you give your opponent is a very good way to win more ball games. This team only forced 11 turnovers last year during the regular season. Got to get better in taking the ball away. If the Yellow Jackets can focus on these 3 key areas in 2025, Georgia Tech can take a step forward and possibly compete for the ACC championship and make their way to the college football playoffs.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.